Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's Mid City Sermon Cast. We're going to continue to look at some wisdom from John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, as we talk about the idea of earning all we can, saving all we can, and giving all we can. So let's dive in. So, one of the things I wrestled with for a time in my kind of understanding of what it meant to follow Jesus was whether it's possible to have money and stuff and still be kind of a faithful follower of Jesus. Or maybe the question of how much money and stuff can I have and still be a faithful follower of Jesus? And the reason I struggled with this idea is there seem to be some places in the Bible that indicate that if I want to follow Jesus, I need to give it all up. I got to give it all away. So, when Jesus calls some of his early disciples, we're told that they drop their nets, like they kind of leave behind their job and they go follow Jesus. When he calls Matthew, we're told that Matthew left behind his tax collecting booth and went and followed Jesus. There's a story about a rich young man who comes and talks to Jesus and says, "Hey, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus tells him, "Sell everything you have and give it to the poor." And then there's this place in Matthew where Jesus kind of draws a pretty clear line in the sand, as far as I can tell. He says, you cannot serve both God and money. And so when I was like growing up and when I was even in my early 20s and I thought about those kinds of things, I thought, well, I guess that if I'm going to follow Jesus, I'm supposed to give up all my stuff. And I had in my mind that, real Christians were supposed to take a vow of poverty, that we're supposed to like eat porridge and wear burlap all the time. I can't own anything nice, right? And by the way, since I don't do any of those things, I guess I'm not a real Christian, right? Or I'm not a real committed Christian, or I'm not all in with Jesus. You ever have those kinds of thoughts? So if you've ever thought that kind of stuff, or again, wondered, what does it mean to follow Jesus and how do I relate to the world and money and my stuff? If you've ever thought about that kind of stuff, then I really invite you to kind of pay attention to this message. So this is week 2 of a 3-week exploration of some timeless wisdom from John Wesley, who's the founder of the Methodist Church. And Wesley says this: earn all you can, save all you can, and give all that you can. So we talked about earning all that we can last week and what it means to kind of work and live as if we're doing things for God. And today we're going to talk about save all that you can. But before we go any further, I want to make something absolutely clear. Everything that the Bible teaches us about money, and in this case, Wesley's advice about money, is not intended to create guilt or shame in you. It's also not meant to like squeeze all the joy out of your life. Like, we're not called to be these sour, dour saints. In fact, and this is the little bit of good news that I want to make sure you hear today. In fact, God wants to give us life, not take life away from us. So everything that Jesus teaches and everything we're called to, it's about increasing our life. It's about giving us better life. Paul says the life that really is life, and not trying to take away from us, right? And part of living a redeemed life in Jesus includes healing how we relate to our stuff. Because I think the way the world teaches us to relate to stuff is broken, and it's wounded and injured. And Jesus wants to heal that in us. So I'm willing to bet that we've all, on some level, experienced the downside of chasing after money and chasing after possessions. One place I can think of in my life where I've experienced that is, I like to buy stuff. I think we all do. If you're an American, you kind of like, we're a very consumer culture, right? But I think about sometimes where I was going to buy something that I wanted, not necessarily something I needed, something I wanted. And I'm the kind of person, I kind of research, I go online, I check to make sure I'm getting the right stuff. And I kind of actually have a little bit of fun with that, right? And then when I finally make a decision that I'm going to buy the thing, typically I'm an online shopper more than I am anything else these days. So I order it online, and then starts this like like the fun, the anticipation, right? You're like waiting for the thing to come. I follow the tracking numbers. I'm waiting. When is it going to arrive at my door? Sometimes if I've ordered from Amazon, I'll be like, how many houses away is the truck, right? And boy, how disappointing it is when they like when you get the message that says, we're sorry, your package has been delayed, but I get over it. But here's the thing. So that when the package arrives, and again, it's something you've been wanting, and you open up that package, what's it like? And by the way, I think it's important that we own this. There is a little bit of a thrill that happens there, right? You get a little bit of joy, a little bit of kind of, a little lift for your day that your package came and you got your thing. But here's the question. How long does that last? How long does that joy and that kind of little bit of a thrill last? Yeah, maybe it depends on what you bought but eventually it goes away, right? And what do we find ourselves doing soon after? We find ourselves kind of reaching out and hunting for the next thing, and I'm searching for the next thing. I'll be honest with you and tell you, there are times where I kind of play that game, and I go as far as to put the next thing I want in my shopping cart, right? And that little one shows up in the shopping cart on the page, right? And then something, I'll call it the Holy Spirit comes and says, no, Brady, you don't really need that. And I take it out of my shopping cart and I make a better decision. But by the way, those companies are really smart nowadays. You know how many times I get an email right after that says, did you forget something? Like they're prompting me to spend my money on stuff, right? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with buying stuff. I really don't think there is, but it's that game, it's that chasing after that little thrill. It's chasing after those desires and filling those desires that can become problematic. We promise ourselves we'll spend more wisely and we'll do better this month than we did last month. But then when the end of the month comes, the bills pile up, the credit card bills come in, and you didn't do any better, right? And it feels awful, and you feel like you're in this trap all the time. Y'all ever have any of these experiences? So here's the thing we need to know. People in the first century, in Jesus' day and in Paul's day, they struggled with a lot of the same things. Now, they didn't have to deal with Amazon and credit cards and stuff like that, but they did seek satisfaction. They did seek security. They did seek status in money and in things. And they too, instead of finding peace, found themselves kind of restless, found themselves trapped in this cycle of wanting more. And Paul writes about this to a guy named Timothy in a letter called 1 Timothy. And I'm going to read with you. This is 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 through 10. This is what Paul writes to Timothy. Of course, there is great gain in godliness combined with contentment. For we brought nothing into the world so that we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with these. But those who want to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. So what Paul tells Timothy here is that it's not money itself that's the problem. People make this mistake all the time. It's like, money is the root of all evil. What Paul says here is it's the love of money. It's the chasing after money. It's living for money that becomes the root of the harm in our lives. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons we have to talk about money in the church. And I know a lot of people don't like it and they get uncomfortable about it and they get kind of squirmy about it. But we're not talking about it to pry or, again, to make you feel guilty or anything. It's kind of a time for a heart check, right? How is our relationship with money going? How is my relationship with money going, right? How much of my heart have I given over to things and to stuff? So one of the most helpful biblical truths that we can learn is to remember that everything that we have comes as a gift from God. So in the letter of James, we read that every good and perfect gift is from above. Paul says something very similar in this letter of 1 Timothy. He says, God richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. But who provides it? God. And I do want to point out, what does he give it to us for? So that we can enjoy it, right? I mean, God again, doesn't want us to be these sort of sour, dour saints. So whenever I think about the fact that everything comes from God, I think of a favorite line of mine from Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan says this: If you want to bake an apple pie from scratch, you must first create the entire universe. So I want you to think about that for a minute. So imagine yourself in the kitchen, you're trying to bake a pie, and if it's an apple pie, you got to have the flour to make the crust, you got to have sugar, you got to have apples. Well, where's all that stuff come from, right? Well, all the ingredients come from the earth, right? So we can kind of make that connection. Well, where's the earth come from? Well, it comes from, and you have to go back all the way back to the act of creation itself. So what Sagan is saying is really kind of true. And I think about that every time I think about life, right? In order for us to be sitting here right now, in order for you to be listening to this sermon cast, the whole universe had to be created. The sun, the moon, the air that we breathe, the bodies that we inhabit, the food that we eat, all of it comes as a gift from God. And why does God give it to us? Because He loves us, He created us, and He wants us to enjoy life and to sustain life. But it's all a gift from God. And when I remember those things, a couple of things happen. First of all, it lowers my anxiety a little bit. So I'm not super anxious. I'm not a super anxious person. I don't worry about money all the time. I know some people do. But every once in a while, I find myself wondering, am I going to have enough? Am I going to have enough? I got 2 teenage boys who I'm paying for car insurance right now. Am I going to be able to afford that? Am I going to be able to afford to send my kids to college? Am I going to be able to retire? Am I going to have medical? I mean, I think about those kinds of things like I know a lot of people do. And when I remember that we have a God who provides for us, a God who provided for me before I was even born, it just kind of lowers my anxiety a little bit and helps me remember, you know what, God's got me and God's taking care of me. The other thing it does is this. It answers this question that I had about, can I have stuff and money and still be a faithful follower of Jesus? And here's the way I think about it. If God gave me all this stuff, He gave it to me to care for me and so that I can care for myself and so I can live, why would He give me all this stuff and then not expect me to use it? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? And one of the things that Wesley teaches that I have found very helpful is that he says that God gives us the things that we have so that we can provide for ourselves, so things like food, clothing, and health. And he adds to that, he says, and so that you can care for your wife, for your children, for your household. Now, obviously, he's talking to men here, right? But this goes for all of us. So one of the reasons that God has given us the things that we have is so that we can care for ourselves and care for the people that we're responsible for. There's nothing wrong with that. In other words, it's okay to be a Christian and have stuff. It's okay to use the resources that God has given us to care for ourselves and the people around us. It's okay to enjoy what God has given us. And if you read deeply in the New Testament, what you'll see is that the Bible confirms this. So did y'all know that Peter, who dropped his nets and followed Jesus, had a home in Capernaum? So we're told that one time Jesus goes to Peter's house in Capernaum and his mother-in-law is there and she's sick and Jesus heals her. There's another place in the Bible where we find Jesus at the home of Mary and Martha in Bethany. Do y'all know that story? So Martha's in the kitchen cooking and Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet. But again, you know where that takes place? It takes place in Mary and Martha's home. And they were committed followers of Jesus. If you read through the New Testament, you can Google this if you don't believe me on this one. There was a group of wealthy women who bankrolled Jesus and his disciples. It's in the Gospels. I mean, they had to have food and they had to have clothes and they had to have all that kind of stuff. Where did it come from? It came from some women who supported Jesus' ministry. Well, if those women were supporting Jesus' ministry, what did they have? They had money and they had stuff, right? So listen, you don't have to be a pauper to follow Jesus. It's not necessary. But listen, as Jesus' followers, we do not look at stuff and money and we don't use stuff and money the way the world around us does. We don't use it for ourselves. We don't use it just all focused on ourselves. We do use it for ourselves, but we also use it to bless others and we use it for God and for God's purposes. And really, when I think we begin to make that shift, that's where we find our freedom. That's when the kind of disordered way that the world tells us we should use our stuff finds order in God and God's purposes. So instead of just thinking, it's all for me and I'm going to use it all for myself and keep chasing that over and over again and coming up empty over and over again, when I understand that it comes from God and I'm to use it wisely for God, it gives money meaning and it gives money purpose and direction. We are not the owners of our stuff. We are stewards. We are trustees. We're not consumers of our stuff. And again, when we realize that, we can begin to find some contentment and direction in our use of money and things. So I do want to be clear about one thing. So when Wesley said, save all you can, he didn't mean like, open up a savings account, maximize your retirement portfolio. People didn't have those options in Wesley's day. What Wesley meant was this: don't waste money. Use it wisely. Don't overspend. Live simply. And hold on to and have enough margin so that you can bless others. Now, I do want to say that Wesley gets a little stern about this at times. He was an 18th century preacher. And so he tells us, don't burn through what God has entrusted you to satisfy your cravings, right? He says, don't just keep chasing after stuff. He also says we shouldn't blow money on appearances, on clothes or fancy furnishings. Maybe we think about cars. You don't need to upgrade your iPhone 15. It's fine. I'm telling that to myself, by the way. And he also says, don't spend money to prop up your image or to win approval with others. There's a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk that I like who puts this a little less politely. He says, stop buying stupid stuff to impress people that you don't even like. So saving, in Wesley's language, is about lifestyle. It's not about accumulation. It's about spending less so that you can love and give more. So what does all this look like? So last week we heard from a church member named Phyllis McLaurin about what it meant to earn all that you can. This week we're going to hear from Rob and Pam Fairley and what they think when they hear the words save all that you can.
Stewardship's always been an important part of our life.
We try to support those. I can't think of any church does that we don't think is outstanding.
My grandparents joined First Methodist Church about 100 years ago. They were married at First Methodist Church. It was only natural that we too would join First United Methodist Church. Our 3 children represent basically the 4th generation. Stewardship's always been an important part of our life. We were fortunate enough to both be raised in families that took us to church. They taught us to tithe, which was the old biblical standard of 10%. My parents said, you're going to have some particular chores, but we're also going to give you these 3 jars. And I think other people have had this experience, but they said the first one is to church. So Robbie give 10% to the church, and the second jar was for saving. And they said, you need to save as much as you give to the church, or more. And so what's the third jar for, Daddy? That's for whatever you want to do. Your money will go to where you want it to go. What's important to you, you'll spend your money on. Early on, we did literally what I just described. We took 10% of our gross income. The first check of the month, back in the days of checks, we wrote, it was a point of pride with us, went to the church. Then the next deposit we made was to our savings account, i.e. eventually investments, and it was a matching 10%. And so then we had 80% to live on. 80% of our income in the early years wasn't all that bountiful. But what that teaches you is good financial management. It teaches you to shop the sales. It teaches you to buy a slightly used car instead of a brand new one that automatically depreciates 25% when you drive off the lot.
If we did take vacations, we didn't stay in the fanciest hotels and didn't go on real fancy trips. But
Pam would pack up the picnic basket for the week or whatever at the beach. Yeah. And we'd share vacations with other families. Yeah. The last time I went to the grocery store for Pam and made a decision about coffee based upon the cost per ounce was yesterday. Yeah. And so it's just a mindset.
Both worked hard, coupons at the grocery store, sales, and just spend. disciplined in how we spend our money.
But that mindset and that commitment and that intentionality has provided us a most blessed life.
Develop a budget. If you don't have one, sit down and come up with one and have your priorities in the right place.
So over time, as we were able to build our income and therefore build our savings, always growing in our giving, it's worked for us. Made the commitment, we give, we save, and then we live on what's left. And that's been a principle that we've really lived by. If you're a person of faith, if you're coming to church, there's got to be some faith in you. Prioritize your faith and then trust it, try it. Have faith in God. That's probably what we can say. We've had faith in God. It's not a, we do this and He's going to give us a 27% return. It's a, we have faith in God. It's going to work out. And over that time, we found an intentional financial journey, but it has allowed us to be more generous. And then frankly, we've carried it on throughout our estate plans. Our final plans when we leave this earth is that our estate will be divided into 4 equal pieces, 25% each, one to each of the 3 children. And the 4th one goes into a permanent fund, an endowment at the United Methodist Foundation of Louisiana, where income will be distributed from now until forever to about a half a dozen of those causes that we hold most dear. One of them being our church, First United Methodist Church. So that saving and investment is really important. It will ultimately allow you to give all you can, and you'll probably find out you can give a whole lot more than you thought you could.
All we have comes from God, and we are trustees of that, so we certainly should be willing to save and give back.
Love God, love yourself, love
others.
others.
So one of the things I love about what Rob and Pam shared is how in sync they are as a couple. And if there's any married couples listening out there, I would encourage you to figure out how you can get on the same page the way that Rob and Pam are. It's take some conversation, take some discussing your values, but they're a great example of how a couple should work together in this stuff. So if you're interested and you want to kind of learn more about what it means to grow in contentment and to practice a little wisdom with money, Adam Hamilton has a great book called Enough, and it's a great place to start. It's got some very basic ideas such as practicing gratitude, budgeting with a purpose, and one question he says we should always ask ourselves is, do I really need this? So this is a season in the church where we're asking people to consider filling out a discipleship covenant. And part of that is kind of thinking about how you're going to use money and what your plan is to give for the upcoming year. So I want to encourage you to still be in prayer about those as you think about how you're going to support the church with your prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness. So at First Methodist, we talk about love cubed, loving God, loving your neighbor, and loving yourself. And Save All You Can touches on all 3 of these. So loving God means recognizing that everything that we have comes from God. It's living with gratitude and with trust. Love of neighbor means living wisely, not thinking about everything I have is for me, but living in such a way that I can give and that I can serve and that I can build a world that reflects God's heart. Love of self means giving ourselves a break and stepping off the treadmill of endless craving. It's about learning contentment, and it's in discovering that in Christ I have enough and I am enough, and resting into that. But for now, I want to leave you with this blessing. May you know the peace that comes from trusting God's provision. May you live with gratitude, with joy, and with contentment. And may you discover that saving all that you can isn't about living small. It's about living freely and living ready to bless others as you have been blessed. All right. Catch you next time, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Mid-City Church Sermoncast. If you'd like to find a home sheet, a resource that accompanies the sermoncast that has more questions to explore, the scriptures we use today, and more information, you can visit our website, midcity.church/sermoncast. If you'd like to support Mid-City Church by giving, please text the word GIVE to 225-307-0662. Thank you for your generosity, and we look forward to seeing you next week.